you probably have an interesting perspective because you own your own business and you presumably manage it and hire people and do all these things. But your business is also about how to manage people better and more effectively.
So my current company, Suggestion Ox, is an employee engagement platform. So companies use that for leaders within the company to hear from their employees and to build a better culture. But before building Suggestion Ox, I also built a company called TeamSnap, which we grew from 4 people up to about 150. So I've definitely had a lot of experience hiring at lots of different stages, including those initial hires where it's like the very first people out of the gate.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between hiring your first person, right? And your 150th person. Like, there are a lot more layers, right, to the management.
For sure. And also, I think there's a big difference between being a first time leader, a first time manager, a first time hirer versus having done it before. A lot of people who are found up starters, not only are they hiring the first employee for their company, but they're also, in some cases, making their first hire, especially for entrepreneurs who, kind of jumped in to start a company without really having a lot of leadership or managerial experience before. It's really taking a leap to learn how to do all of those things at the same time.
Even with hiring somebody at a big company, I think it's completely different when it's employee 2 and employee 3.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to give the kind of big picture of your background, tell us a little bit about Suggestion Ox, how you started it. Who's your ideal customer? How do they know that, oh, now's the time I should get Suggestion Ox for my company?
Yeah, I actually started Suggestion Ox kind of as a side hustle while I was running my last company, which was called TeamSnap. And the insight I had is we built a really great culture at TeamSnap. Like just, you know, I think it was a top-notch employee culture, but still we would find that people would not speak candidly to us in our one-on-ones. And it's the nature of human psychology. We are bad at humans of having tough conversations, and we're especially bad as employees saying things to our manager that they may not want to hear. My insight from that is that people need some kind of a psychological safety in order to express those things they want to express. So we built Suggestion Ox. It's built around anonymity. So it lets employees give feedback to the leaders in the company without being identified. And it's truly anonymous. There's a lot of employee tools that sort of claim to have some kind of an anonymous feature, but employees really don't trust those because it's built into the company HR software, their email address is in there. People are just they're very suspicious of stuff like that. So we built this tool to be completely independent. An employee doesn't have to, they don't have to log into anything, they don't have to give their email address. There's no way to track them. So people can really speak candidly with their ideas, their questions, their concerns. And it helps leaders source what's really going on in people's minds and not the platitudes that they give you during a one-on-one.
As the company gets bigger, like you say, the HR component becomes stronger, and you never know as an employee what the privacy is, what's going on there. And you also see that some companies like claim to do 360 reviews and things like that. But it's, in my experience, very rare for that review to be more than, say, 180 degrees. Your peers and your
Right.
boss give you lots of feedback, but nobody tells the managers or the bosses or the CEOs how they're doing as
Yeah.
well. So this is an interesting way to introduce that aspect to it.
Yeah, and people I think everybody's been burned at some company before where they spoke up and they got fired, they got reprimanded, they got told that they need to just like toe the line. And so it just teaches people that you should keep your mouth shut because bad things can happen. So in a lot of companies, it's funny, we go out to sell this product to companies and generally our ideal customer is somebody who really truly wants to hear this from their employees but they can't get their employees to speak up because they've been burned before. So this is a way, in many ways, for the company to just say, yes, we are listening. And it's a little bit of a leap of faith for the company because you're going to hear things that are hard things. And in many cases, you just have to leave yourself open to hearing those things. But it allows you to take action as a leader to fix those problems that are simmering underneath your company.
In a smaller company, you can walk around and get a feel for what's going on, but the bigger you get, the more disconnected I think as a leader you become from what people are actually thinking, what they're saying, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And our software is not good for a small company because in a small company, even though it's anonymous, there's few enough people that whatever context you give or even the way you write is something that people will be able to recognize. So, I don't recommend our software for a company of less than 50, 100 people. And at that size, as a manager, you really should be talking to your people every week and really building those strong relationships with them. It's funny because even though my company makes a tool that helps with company culture, I actually believe that in many cases, traditional employee engagement software actually backfires because it creates this illusion as a manager that you are in touch with your employees. And so I think a lot of companies, they will launch some kind of employee engagement software and then they'll be like, well, I guess I don't really need to do my one-on-ones this week because if people have something to say, they'll just say it through the software. But people don't say it through the software. And it's really as a leader, it's all about building those personal one-on-one relationships. And as we get into talking about those initial hires and managing those initial employees and ensuring that they are doing their work, like it's all about building those relationships, having those frequent one-on-ones and showing your employees that they don't work for the company. They're not owned for the company. That they truly are a part of the company.
Yeah, well said. And that's a good transition into talking about how do you get started with the hiring process. I guess for context, can you share how many employees you currently have and what the different roles are?
Sure. Yeah. So Suggestion Ox, we're a small company right now. We fluctuate between about five to seven people, depending on what roles we need. Right now, I think we have five full timers, and then we have a number of part time contractors who we treat. They're not true employees, but they are in Slack. We are talking to them every day. So the line is a little more blurred now between what's an employee and what's a contractor, but we really try to treat everybody the same way. And so our key roles are, I think, like any company, development, customer success, support, design, marketing. And those are the kind of key roles that we have.
Right. And most of the sales you do, I assume?
Sales, yeah, me and my co-founder Wade, we do the sales. So yeah, we have not hired for sales other than we've done some contract work with sales.
Right. Makes sense. That's the bootstrapper approach, right? Sales is the last thing that you move off your plate as a founder, for sure.
Exactly.
Besides your co-founder, what role was your first hire? Like, how did you decide, oh, this is what we need? And
Yeah.
how do you think about that?
So our first hire, and I think this is very typical for a smaller company, it was support. It gets to the point where I'm spending a lot of time in my day answering support questions from customers who need help logging into their account or understanding how a little feature works. And so very, very quickly, that becomes something that you can take off your plate and is one of the easier roles to hire for because it's not a super high skilled role. I mean, you're looking for somebody with the willingness to learn and a strong work ethic, but it's not like hiring a senior developer or something like that. So we hired for support very early on. And then I'm a great believer in growing people in the company if you can. So our initial support hire was really just a couple of hours a week just to take that burden off of the plate for me and Wade. But over the years, she's grown from being just a part-time support person to a full-time customer success person where she not only handles support tickets, but she has a full portfolio of customers that she supports over time. She works with them on training. She works with them on renewals. She does some pre-sales work with customers. She'll do demos and stuff like that and then help them get set up. She does a whole lot of things in the company. And for us, we're very lucky because she can fill a lot of both administrative and general support and customer success roles.
Wow, and that really is a dream hire. That was your first hire, is now doing all that?
Yeah, and again, we didn't hire her for that to start. We hired her just to answer support tickets, and we grew her capabilities over time. I love the model that we used with her. So and I've used this model at previous companies. So she was a mom who had been in the workforce, had taken time off from work to have her first child, and now was looking to get back into the workforce. And it's a great model if you're looking to do a part-time hire and especially a part-time hire that might grow into a bigger role because a lot of people that you would find for an entry-level support role are more entry level in their careers as well. But this particular person, I mean, she had a career. She left the career to start a family. And now she was looking to get back into the workforce. So we get somebody essentially for an entry level type role who's got a tremendous skill set and a background of success working in companies. She was thrilled because she, you know, dipping her toe back into the work world, she didn't want to make a huge commitment to a full-time job or even a part-time job. She wanted something that she could dip in and out of while she was sort of balancing that with the child rearing. So it really worked out perfectly. We got somebody who was, probably a little overqualified for the job, but she was thrilled to have a job that gave her the flexibility to return to the work world at her pace. And over the years, then she eventually grew to full time, and so it worked. It's a wonderful model for people who are looking to hire this kind of part time, early stage jobs. Look for parents who have left the workforce and are looking to get back in.
I think this is a hidden advantage that startups don't realize they have is that early on, they probably don't need full time for certain roles. And there's a lot of different flexibility points like this, but like it's a huge advantage to hire people because you can get some great people who like they maybe care less about like maybe the salary, but they can do work they find rewarding and have the flexibility they need to do whatever else they need to do in their life. It's a great fit for a startup. And yet so many people try to hire a more traditional looking candidate just because maybe they're comfortable with that because they worked at a previous company and they're going after, you know, somebody who wants full-time job and traditional resume.
Yeah, I love people that have a work history. There's nothing wrong with hiring somebody who's 22 years old and just out of college, but I think a lot of those folks, they are still learning how to work in a company. They are learning how to manage their time. They're learning how to navigate office politics. They're learning how to manage their manager and things like that. And when you hire a mom or dad who had a career and is coming back, or even you hire somebody who's, decided to reskill, you hire somebody in their 50s and 60s who's realized that, like, hey, I'm making a career shift from X into Y. They may be junior from a skill level in terms of the role you're hiring them for, but as somebody who is experienced with the work world, they're very experienced.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often say to founders, when you're hiring, you can choose either expensive and experienced, or you can choose someone who's less experienced and then spend some time training them. This is kind of a third option. You find someone who's experienced, they have training, maybe not exactly in the area you're looking to hire for, and maybe they can't work full time or something like that, but they're going to jump in and know how business works right out of the gate, which is kind of a cool third option.
As a manager, I don't mind teaching people how to do the work and how to do the job. I'm less fond of teaching people how to work. And I think you can run into that with people who don't have a lot of work experience. If you are hiring somebody for an entry level role who is new in their career, new to work, just be aware that there's more to it than just teaching them how your widgets need to be pushed around. You're teaching them fundamental skills like time management and stuff like that.
How to be a professional. Yeah. So when you're putting together a like a job posting, what do you put into it? Do you put anything different than a traditional one? Do you find different venues to post the job openings in?
So I generally first will take any job that I'm hiring for and go out to my network, because just if I can hear from somebody who knows somebody, it's always going to be better. And then beyond that, just go to traditional hiring venues. For our developers, we've actually gone through an agency just because it's easier for us to go through an agency because they pre-vet people. In terms of the job description, I have some opinions on that. One is I think it's important to really talk about the culture and personality of your company. There's a million job listings out there that people are going to be wading through, and you need to tell them not just what the job is, but why they should want to work for you and why your company is more interesting, what kind of support they're going to get, what the culture is going to look like. The other thing I feel very strongly about is you should be realistic in terms of what you're looking for in the job. There's this real sort of tendency in job descriptions to put in anything that, every fantasy qualification that your employee might possibly bring to the table. And all that does is weed people out who absolutely are qualified for the job, but are like, I don't have 45 years advanced Rails experience, so I'm not going to apply for this job. So just be realistic in terms of what you're asking for. It's well known that women in particular will be reluctant to apply for jobs if they can't match every single qualification on the list, whereas men are more willing to say, "No, I could do it." It's really important to just be realistic what you're looking for there. But I probably spend as much time talking about what the work environment's going to look like, what the company culture is, how their day is going to look, what the management philosophy is as the actual job. Because if you're a JavaScript developer, you pretty much just need to know what are you working with, and that's it. I mean, uh, JavaScript development is JavaScript development, and yeah, there are differences in like the specific frameworks you're working with, and but you don't need 40 bullet points on the technical details of the job in your initial job. Your job description it's a sales document, and I think a lot of people misunderstand that. A lot of people put their job description together as if it's like it's a job description or a spec or something like that. And your job description is not that. It's not a spec. It's a sales document to get the very best people who are going to match your culture to apply for your job. You can always, once you get somebody in and you have a conversation, you can always go over a much more detailed job description that talks about, what's going to be involved and what the expectations are. But to start with, make it a sales pitch.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It is a sales document in the same way a resume is a sales document. And
Right.
but you never see a resume that says, my employer needs to have 20 years of experience managing engineers, and my employer, but that's the way you see a lot of job descriptions written is that the candidate needs to have this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And by the time you get to the end, you have still no idea, like, oh, what's the product? What kind of customer am I helping? Like, what does my day look like? What's the compensation look like? Which are pretty basic questions when you're trying to get someone to apply to a job, right? And yeah, so I totally agree that it is totally a sales document. I was looking at one of my investments, they had a job posting, and I loved it because it says that they were looking for people who were curious by nature. And I was like, that's great because that tells you a lot about what they're like as an employer. Like, oh, they want curiosity. Like, this is interesting. They must want people to really contribute in kind of a creative way to this company. That's a pretty cool thing to add in there.
And be honest. This was the thing that we constantly ran into at TeamSnap, my last company. We were hiring a lot of people at one point, and we talked a lot in our job descriptions and in our interview process about what our company culture was like. And repeatedly, we would hire people. We do the 3 month follow up conversation after they'd been here, and they'd be like, you know what, like I thought this was gonna be too good to be true when you were all telling me how things were during the interview, and it was actually true. So, don't sell what you don't actually have. Sell what your company culture really looks like, not what you want it to be, because when there's a mismatch between what your employee signs up for and what they actually get, things can quickly go south.
It leads to motivation problems, right? Like, you want to hire someone who's kind of aligned to the way you do work already. And yeah, if you kind of mislead about what you actually want, and then yeah, you'll hire someone who isn't aligned and they might not be motivated. And especially for a bootstrap startup, you want someone who doesn't require a heavy hand in terms of management, right?
Yeah. D and also, I think this is hard, especially for bootstrap founders who are new to hiring and new to leadership, is often they don't know they don't know what kind of culture they are building, and they're not really very experienced in managing people. So a lot of people don't really know, like, you know, am I a micromanager? Am I hands off? Do I actually want somebody who is self motivated, who's going to take a lot of ownership, or am I the kind of person who is going to basically be watching them on an hourly basis to see what they're doing? So that I think that's an area where a lot of new leaders could use mentorship to help work through, like, what are they really looking for? What is their style? Or what do they need to learn to have the reality match what they think they want?
Do you have a story about how you learned that for yourself? How you like to delegate? How you like to manage?
It's interesting. I had a very non-traditional schooling background. I went to a series of alternative schools. I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and so really from kindergarten through high school, I went to these kind of strange alternative schools where we called the teachers by the first names. There were no bells. You could go to class or not go to class. There was no hall monitors. A lot of the classes were very self-directed in terms of learning. You could basically work at your own pace. So I think I grew up with a lot of sort of trust and autonomy myself. And I think that's how I learned to do that. And it really, that just kind of became a natural extension of how I ran a company when I started my own companies. Cause I really, I didn't intend to become an entrepreneur and run companies. I was a newspaper reporter and editor right out of college. And then I worked in advertising for 10 years as a copywriter. And it kind of just, I stumbled into founding a company. And my third career was as a web developer. And we ended up building a web app that hit it big. And so, suddenly we were running a company. And so I basically just I ran a company based on my experience and how I would want to be treated. And that was very much based on trust and autonomy because that's how sort of my schooling had been to that point.
Well, I think a lot of founders have difficulty, especially with understanding developer performance. So in that context, how do you know when a developer is performing well or not?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in having a results oriented workplace, which means essentially you judge people on what they produce and not on how busy they look. And I hear this a lot from founders. They constantly will say things like, "Well, I can't tell how hard my employee is working, or I can't tell if they're working, or I can't really sense if they're at their desk at this time." And my answer to that is, who cares? Like you should be judging your people on what they're producing, the quality code that they're pushing. And it's up to you as a leader to define what productivity looks like in your company. And it doesn't look like number of hours spent sitting at the desk. It's not defined by lines of code written. It's defined by features that you are shipping that are quality built without bugs. So it's really important to define within your company, however you size your projects, whether you're doing t-shirt sizing or story points or however you're sizing your projects, you should have a general idea within your company of how long it takes to ship a project of a certain size. And that's what you judge people on. And so the conversations become around, why are you not shipping this amount of stuff within this amount of time? Not like, doesn't really seem like you're that busy. Because when you're a salaried employee, there's not a lot of incentive to work faster if it just means that you're just going to get more work put onto your plate. Imagine if your job is to put fish heads into a bucket and you ask, well, what happens if I put the fish heads in a bucket faster? They're like, well, we'll give you more fish heads to put into a bucket. There's not a lot of incentive to do that. So um, when you define within your company how fast you expect work to be produced, then your employees have an incentive to get that work produced because then they are free the rest of the time. If my developer can produce what I consider to be 2 weeks of solid work and they can do it in a week, I'm fine with them taking a week off. I don't mind that at all. I care about what they ship, not about how many hours they work during the day or how busy they look.
I also think that having a little slack time for certain roles is valuable when you have an emergency, like you have some security problem or the site goes down or something like that. The last thing you want is to have a developer who's already stretched thin to have to deal with an emergency and they're tired, they can't think clearly, they make mistakes. I've seen it several times in my career where it's like, oh, why are we working ourselves so hard? And then we had an emergency and it took us way too long to figure stuff out just because our brains weren't working at that
Yeah.
point.
I think it's hard for non-technical founders working with developers because it's hard to have a good sort of gut sense on how long work should take. For a technical founder, I'm semi-technical and my co-founder, Wade, is extremely technical. So for us, it's pretty easy to have a gut sense for how long work should take. If it feels like work is not being produced fast enough, we can have that conversation with the employee and get to the bottom of what is it? Is it a motivation problem? Is it a specs problem? Is it a tools problem? Is it a not understanding what we're looking for problem? For a non-technical founder, that can be very hard, and it can pay to bring in a mentor, or a consultant, or somebody you trust who is technical to just look at the work that's being produced and just say like, hey, for a developer at this level, you should probably be expecting them to produce at this speed. Most of us are working remotely right now, and it's so easy to fall into the trap of feeling like I can't see my person working, so I don't know if they're working. And that's just a completely false way to look at all of this. It's not about how busy people are looking. It's about what they produce. And just you should come back to that over and over again in every one-on-one you have with them. It's, what are you producing? What are you producing? What are you producing?
Yeah. How often do you meet each of your employees? I'm assuming you're the supervisor for most of these employees?
No, actually I'm not. My co-founder runs development, so he meets with developers. I run design and support. And generally, I believe that you should have a one-on-one every week, if not every week, every 2 weeks minimal with your employees. And I think one-on-ones are very misunderstood and misused. To me, a one-on-one is about building relationships with your employees. It should be a lot of it should just be social time, just getting to know them, getting to know each other as a person, finding out what makes them tick, and then a little bit just talking about the work, the company, but not micromanaging the work. A one-on-one is not a status update. You should have other facilities in your company for doing a status update. A one-on-one is really to find out what's not working for them. What could be better in the company? What could you do better as a manager? What's keeping them from being more productive? What are structural problems that they see that are hurting the company? I like to say that you should never be surprised by an employee quitting, and an employee should never be surprised by a bad review or being fired. All of those conversations should be happening all the time with your employees. I am constantly working to find out what my employees' job satisfaction is, what would make it better, whether they are looking somewhere else, whether they should be looking somewhere else. If an employee abilities have grown to the point that I don't have a next role for them, I should be working with them as a friend and mentor to help them think through whether they should be looking for a job somewhere else. But I would rather get ahead of that. And if I have an employee who's like, yeah, it's really time for you to move into a, senior role where you manage some people, we're not going to have that for you. I would rather have me initiate that conversation with them and work with them over a couple months to help them find their next role in another company while giving me the time to backfill their role rather than having that big surprise where I hear like, sorry, I'm leaving. You've got 2 weeks or less. I will probably jinx myself saying this, but in my career, I don't think I've ever had a direct report quit on me, or we worked together on, hey, it's time for you to go because we can't provide these opportunities for you anymore. You should be having those conversations constantly. You should be building that kind of trust with them that when they're thinking about leaving, the first person they talk to is you instead of the last person they talk to. Usually that's what happens is somebody goes out, they get a job offer, they take the job, and then they come to you and they go like, well, sorry, I'm leaving. I want them to have that conversation with me first, trusting that there's not going to be retribution. People are afraid that if they come and they say like, hey, I think I'm looking for another job, they're afraid that you're just going to fire them because you think they're going to leave. I want them to trust that if they come to me with that, I'm going to do what I can to help them stay, whether it's more money or more responsibility or a title change. Or if we can't offer that, I'm going to enthusiastically support and help them move on to the next place in their career.
Yeah, I think that attitude's very unusual. Would you agree?
I think it's unusual, and I think it's too bad because I think yes, you will lose a couple of people over time if you basically if you're there to help them leave, but many more people will stay because they say people don't quit companies, they quit managers. And I think it's really true. And my goal as a manager is to build the kind of place where somebody knows that we have a great relationship and they're trusted and that I'm here for them and that they love working with me and not for me. And that doesn't mean that I don't say hard things as their manager. I think that's the other mistake people make in ones is they don't have the hard conversations. They're afraid to tell somebody that their work isn't up to snuff or that they're missing something or something. Delaying those conversations always makes those conversations harder. And
Yeah.
when you do have those hard conversations, but you make it clear that it's not because you're mean or you're trying to hurt their feelings, but you're genuinely doing it to try to help their career, you build a tremendous amount of trust and loyalty. People want to know that you're looking out for them, and sometimes looking out for them is saying the hard thing, whether it's like, "Hey, you need to brush up this skill," or, "Hey, this thing you did 2 days ago, it disappointed me as a leader, and I think you could have done it better, and let's talk about how you could have done it better." And that kind of candor, when done from a place of kindness, it really builds a ton of loyalty.
There's this book called Abolishing Performance Appraisals, and it
Mhm.
has exactly this point, which is if you do like an annual or a twice a year performance review, it tends to cause bosses to basically save up all their negative
Right.
feedback, put in that review, and then, like you're saying, just complete surprise to the employee because they haven't been getting this negative feedback because their leader isn't confident enough or doesn't have the tools or whatever it may be to directly express their concerns about the work. And that's
Yeah.
a big challenge, right? Like, because yeah, then somebody gets their annual review and it's like, oh, does not meet expectations. And they're like, dude, we've been talking once a month for the whole year. And I never once heard that wasn't meeting expectations. And then they conclude that, yeah, their boss is a jerk and they find a new job.
Yeah.
But if they
It
approach it your way, then, well, one, people see like, oh, wow, this person was basically told they can do better at a different company and they work together, hire a replacement. And this, the manager has his career guidance for me. If you want to hire ambitious people, this is a great way to illustrate that you have a business that's good for ambitious people, right? That even though, boy, you sure could keep this person at the senior engineer level for, forever. But you're willing to basically say, "No, I think you're ready to move on, but we don't have a role here. Let's figure out your next thing. And oh, by the way, maybe you can help me hire your replacement, which would be nice."
Yeah. It's really about building those relationships where the person trusts that you are there to help them. I like to think of the role of the manager as kind of like the handler in a spy movie, where like in the spy movie where everything's gone as bad as it can go, and the spy is just like they've reached the low point. Suddenly the handler in a cloak like whisks them into the safe house and gives them the weapons that they need to fight back against the bad guys. And I really see that, for too long, the role of the manager has been the boss. And it's like, it's about bossing people around and telling them what to do. And there's this real sort of like, I don't want to make my boss mad about this. Oh, my boss is on me. And that's not what managing is. Managing, you are there to help your people as much as you can. And sometimes that help is helping their career, even if it doesn't help directly the company. Sometimes that help is giving them hard feedback that they need to hear so they can grow. And sometimes that help is just helping unblock something in the company. When I talk to folks in one-on-ones, a lot of times managers will ask about blockers, like, what are your blockers? But especially good employees don't like to admit that they have blockers. Nobody likes to admit that they're blocked. Everybody feels like, oh, I can work my way through it. So instead, I like to ask, well, what would help you go faster? And when you ask what would help them go faster, you usually hear about the blockers, and it's usually something else in the company. It's somebody or some department or something else in the company is basically getting in the way of them working faster. So that's then my hint as a manager that like, oh, it's my job to help unblock them. So sometimes that's going to another person or going to another department and solving whatever that problem is. Sometimes it's just working through it with the employee to help them figure out how to work around the obstacle. But it's really like your job as a manager is a helper more than anything else.
How would you approach giving an employee negative feedback? Say someone is supposed to deliver a widget on Friday and they didn't make it on Friday. How do you kick off that conversation in your one-on-one? Do you have an approach to that?
Just calmly and directly is what I would say. Nobody wants to be screamed at. So don't be a screamer. Try to not be emotional about it, but also be direct. And it's very hard for most people to be direct. For folks watching in America, like we are not a super direct culture. When managers give feedback, they tend to very much beat around the bush a little bit, and then they'll give a little bit of feedback, but then they'll try to play it down by going, but yeah, but don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Don't, it's fine. And you just have to be direct. You just have to say, here's what happened. This didn't meet the expectations. It wasn't done well. I think this could have been done better. Here's why this matters and here's why it's important. And don't temper it. If somebody has a big miss, you don't want to say, hey, but it's okay. It's not okay. It's a problem. Let's work through how to not have that happen again. And again, it depends on whether is this a one-time thing, in which case you just talk about, hey, this happened this time. If it's a pattern, you need to have an even broader conversation. Talk about this keeps happening. Why does this keep happening? And without sounding threatening, you also need to be clear that there are implications to this, and it is part of your job to deliver this widget on time and on budget. And it seems like you're continuing to miss these widgets, and this may threaten your job if you can't do this. So you need to be direct on as to what is happening.
I want to talk a little bit about your design team and if there's any challenges or differences in how you manage a design team, because I think that's not super common experience in the bootstrapper community either. Not a lot of bootstrappers hire designers, even when they only have 7 employees. That's uncommon. So I'm curious how you think about that skill differently if you do.
I think design is critical. As Steve Jobs said, design isn't what it looks like, it's how it works. And a good designer is not just making your software or your product look nice, they're also making it work nicely. And obviously design has a huge range, from interaction designers to visual designers to front-end designers to marketing designers. But I can give you a few tips. One is that designers really seem to be a different breed. And I think one thing that sets designers apart is they're very independent thinking. They really don't like to be micromanaged. Whatever organizational skills the designers have to organize things visually also makes them typically very organized from a process standpoint. So I've always found uh, that designers are the most organized people that I manage, and they really don't need to be micromanaged in terms of process and things like that. I also find that designers are, for whatever reason, very skeptical of what I will call company BS. So they do not respond at all to, rah HR team skits. They don't respond to ridiculous company policies that just seem to get in the way of doing work. I am personally a huge believer in a very policy-like company. I think that most companies build policies to try to prevent like the worst actors from doing bad things. And I think you should basically have very few policies, and you should trust that almost everybody will do the right thing. So for instance, a lot of companies will have to get every expense over $10 has to be approved by your manager. And that's to prevent the one person from charging a refrigerator to their company card. In my experience, that just creates a huge amount of red tape and sort of this feeling of distrust throughout the company. I'm a real believer in like, just don't have a policy. Just say, talk to your manager if you're concerned about whether your expenses needs to be approved. And it puts a lot of responsibility on the employee to think about it, but it basically says, hey, we trust you and we're not going to get in the way of doing your job when you have to charge things all the time. Anyway, I digress, getting back to designers. So designers really they don't want the company to get in the way of them doing their job. That's the big thing. And then unless you are a designer as their manager, most of your one-on-ones should really, again, just be focused on building relationships, job satisfaction, and so on. You probably do not speak enough of the language of design to have like super meaningful conversations about the design, other than, does it work and what do you personally like? So in many ways, I really like to empower designers to drive those conversations. For developers, they're not as often called upon to justify their work because there's less of an aesthetic quality to code. I mean, there is an aesthetic quality, but less so. With designers, they often need to sell their design to the rest of the company, to the developers, to the product managers, to whoever. And so I try to put it on them as much as possible to explain the thought process that went behind the interactions they're designing, the colors, the color palette, the layout, all of that stuff. So really as much trust as possible and putting it on them to share that with the company.
I want to go back to what you said about trust. And in my experience, maybe 1 out of 20, 1 out of 30 people you encounter in any job, any industry are people who just have, let's say, a negative impact, like they're chronic liars. They try to form some sort of discord in the organization. So I guess, do you have an approach to screen that out at the interview process? And how do you build trust over time? Do you have anything that you look at or recommend?
Yeah, so it's very hard to screen those people out during the interview process because people who are lying weasels are extremely good at being lying weasels in interviews. So you're probably not going to weed them out during the interview. Uh, when you discover that somebody you have hired is distrustful, fire them immediately. Don't wait. And that's one thing that's hard for new founders is it feels bad to fire people, but and it's hard in a small company because if you only have one developer or two developers, if you fire them, you have zero developers. But it's always the right thing to do. If it feels like it's time for somebody to go, fire them. You'll never regret it. In terms of trust, I'm actually not a big fan of making people earn trust over time because I think that is by definition distrustful. If I say my company culture is built around trust and I say, well, but we're not going to give you trust for the first 3 months, you have to earn our trust. It's really, you're creating a distrustful environment. So I typically I just tell people I'm going to trust you from day one. And, is it possible I'll get burned? It's possible, but there's not that much way to burn me in my company. Is somebody going to steal my code base and start a competitor? I don't think that's going to happen. Is somebody going to take a company card and buy a car on it? I mean, maybe, but they'll go to prison. I don't think they're going to do that. I think companies really, they get way out over their skis being nervous about things that aren't going to have a big impact. If an employee has a company card, they could probably charge up to $1,000 or $2,000 on it or something. Like if an employee goes out and charges $1,000 that they shouldn't have charged on it, that's the worst case scenario. If it cost me $1,000, big deal. I can live with $1,000 mistake. It's much better than having this distrustful environment where somebody has to get approval for every single thing that they do. There are things in terms of access levels where it's less about like, do I trust the person? And it's more about your company's security posture. So obviously you want to have as few people as possible who have access to your customers' private data and stuff like that. That's just basic security hygiene. But in terms of having access to other things within the company or other benefits, I give that trust from day one, including things like vacation. Like I know there's companies that's like, well, you get X number of days of vacation, but you don't earn them until this time, or we have unlimited vacation, but you don't get to take vacation for the first 6 months because we want to see whether we trust you to stick around. And I'm just like, on all of that stuff. On day one, you're an employee and we trust you and we trust you to do the right thing. And I think that pays off much more than trying to guard against somebody possibly doing something bad. And there's two pieces to this. One is trust and one is ownership. They really work hand in hand. And when you talk about the new managers, the new entrepreneurs who feel like, well, I just don't feel like my employees are working that hard, it usually comes down to ownership, that they don't feel like they own their own work. They don't feel like they're a part of the company. They feel like they're just working as a hired gun. You need to let your people know that you trust them to do their jobs. They own whatever it is that they are working on, and you're not going to micromanage them. And they should feel that sort of pride of creating whatever they're creating.
Yeah, I think that's ambitious people want that, right? They want a sense of autonomy, responsibility, ownership. They want to be able to point at something and say that they did that.
Yeah. And it's easy. It's easy to become a stealth micromanager where you're basically telling people exactly what to work on, exactly how to do it. And when you do that, people are just going to hit their marks and do the minimum that they have to. I'll give you an example. We hired a pretty junior developer at our company, and he's a front end developer. And we were basically redoing the entire front end of our application. And we could have told him exactly what technologies to use and exactly how to do it. And instead, we said, you own this. You're redoing the front end of our application. Tell us what you have in mind. Tell us why it's the right idea. Go out, tell us what the process is going to be and go do it. And we probably could have done it a little faster and more efficiently if we had told him every single thing that he needed to do and laid it out for him in the steps. But the fact that we basically said, you own this, I think not only will build a better employee over time, but I think in the long run, it's going to be a better product because he built it, he cares about it. And when it breaks at, you know, 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, and we write in Slack like, "Hey, this thing broke." He's not going to be like, "Well, I'm off the clock." He's going to be like, "Oh, my thing broke. I got to go fix that." And that's the thing is I want employees who they'll do the work when the work needs doing because they take pride in it.
I love that. When you give a project like that, do you have the person responsible? Do they propose like a plan to you or schedule, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. We essentially say, "How are you going to do this? How long is it going to take?" In the case of the front end redesign, like what are the technologies you're going to use? What's it going to look like? What are your milestones going to look like? And obviously, we work through Git and stuff like that. So we're doing pull requests, so we have a chance to review it all. But yeah, we're looking for a plan and having them go. But it's much better to ask for a plan than to tell them what the plan is going to be. I'm a huge believer in as little as possible, don't tell people what to do. Ask them what they're going to do and be available to help them if they want help. But it's tough. People have been trained in traditional companies to do what their boss says and to make their boss happy and to basically get a list of instructions and work down the checklist. And it's hard for people in a different environment to have that kind of autonomy. And that's where, as a manager, I'm using my one on ones not to tell them how to do the work, but to help them learn for themselves how to think through the work.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a great conversation. Do you have any final words of wisdom, and where should people come learn more about Suggestion Ox?
So you can learn more about Suggestion Ox at suggestionox.com. You can follow me at andrewberkowitz.com. I've got a blog where I write about a whole bunch of different things, not just business. And my final word of wisdom for hiring and leading people is really just have those conversations. I'm working on a book right now about one-on-ones because I think it's an undertapped tool that people have. I'm always shocked when I talk to managers and that they say they're having trouble with their people. Like, well, how often do you talk to them? And they're like, well, we talk quarterly. I'm like, it's really not building. That's not your job. The one-on-one is the best half hour you can spend per week with an employee. It pays off tenfold. So even if it feels like we just talked last week, we just talked 2 weeks ago, like there's nothing to talk about. There's always stuff to talk about. It should feel like hanging out with a friend.
That sounds great. When is that expected to come out, or is that kind of a long-term project?
I'm just getting started right now. I just published a book on teaching improv a couple weeks ago. So it's going to be a while before my next book comes out.
Oh, so you've already written a management book. That's cool.
Yeah, I have many, many and varied interests.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of founders. That's really cool. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's been great to have this conversation.